The Royal Guard Story. Part 1. Marcus Williams stood perfectly still outside Buckingham Palace, his red uniform pressed to perfection, and his black bearskin hat sitting precisely on his head. Tourists gathered around him, taking photos and making jokes. Some tried to make him laugh by pulling funny faces. Others whispered comments about how silly he looked in his traditional outfit. "Look at this guy," laughed an American tourist, waving his hand in front of Marcus's face. "He's like a statue. What a waste of a human brain." Marcus had heard it all before. After 3 years as a Queen's Guard, he was used to people treating him like a tourist attraction rather than a person. They saw the uniform and assumed he was just decoration. They had no idea that behind his stoic expression was a mind that absorbed every word, every conversation, every debate happening around him. During his childhood in Birmingham, Marcus had been different from other kids. While his friends played football in the streets, he sat in the local library reading books about history, politics, and philosophy. His teachers noticed his exceptional ability to understand complex ideas and express them clearly. But Marcus came from a working-class family where education beyond high school seemed impossible. His father worked in a factory, and his mother cleaned offices at night. They were proud, hard-working people who wanted the best for their son, but university fees were beyond their reach. When Marcus finished school with excellent grades, he faced a difficult choice. He could take a low-paying job in Birmingham or find another path. The British Army Recruitment Office offered that path. Marcus saw military service as a way to serve his country, while gaining skills and experience. He excelled in basic training, showing natural leadership abilities and an impressive attention to detail. His commanding officers noticed his intelligence and recommended him for the elite Queen's Guard Regiment. Becoming a Queen's Guard required months of additional training. Marcus learned the ancient traditions, memorized countless protocols, and practiced standing motionless for hours. The physical demands were intense, but the mental discipline required was even greater. Guards had to remain focused and alert while appearing completely blank and emotionless. Many people quit during training, unable to handle the pressure and the strange nature of the job. But Marcus found something fascinating in the role. Standing guard gave him a unique perspective on human behavior. He watched diplomats, politicians, celebrities, and ordinary tourists. He listened to their conversations and observed their interactions. The palace was a crossroads where people from all walks of life converged. Marcus heard discussions about international politics, business deals, scientific discoveries, and cultural events. While appearing to be just a decorative soldier, he was actually receiving a world-class education in human nature and global affairs. His fellow guards often complained about the boredom of standing still for hours. They counted minutes until their shifts ended and looked forward to evenings at the pub. But Marcus used the time differently. He turned each shift into a learning opportunity, mentally cataloging the debates and discussions he witnessed. One particular day changed everything for Marcus. A group of Oxford University professors was visiting the palace for a reception. As they waited outside, they began discussing the decline of public discourse and the art of debate. Professor Elizabeth Harrington, head of the Oxford Union Society, argued that young people had lost the ability to engage in meaningful intellectual discussion. "Students today can barely construct a coherent argument," she complained to her colleague. "They rely on social media sound bites instead of developing real critical thinking skills. The art of debate is dying." Her companion, Professor James Mitchell, disagreed. "I think intelligence and eloquence exist everywhere, but we don't always recognize them. Sometimes brilliant minds are hidden in places we least expect," Professor Harrington scoffed. "Where exactly would we find these hidden intellectual gems? I doubt we'd discover the next great debater standing guard at a palace." Marcus wanted desperately to join their conversation. He had thoughts about their topic that he believed could contribute meaningfully to their discussion, but his duty required absolute silence and stillness. He could only listen and think, storing their words for later reflection. That evening, after his shift ended, Marcus sat in his small apartment and thought about the professor's conversation. He realized that Professor Harrington's dismissive attitude represented a larger problem in society. People made assumptions about others based on appearances, jobs, or social class. Intelligence and talent were often overlooked because they didn't fit expected patterns. Marcus began to formulate an idea. What if he could prove that intellectual ability existed in unexpected places? What if someone like him, A working-class Royal Guard could compete with the privileged students at prestigious universities. The thought excited and terrified him simultaneously. He started researching the Oxford Union Society, the famous debating club that had produced prime ministers, Nobel Prize winners, and influential leaders throughout history. The union held weekly debates on important topics, and membership was open to all Oxford students. But Marcus wasn't a student, and he had no connection to the university world. Still, he couldn't shake the idea. Every day at his post, he continued listening to conversations and mentally practicing arguments. He imagined himself standing at a podium, articulating complex ideas with clarity and passion. The fantasy seemed impossible, but it gave him purpose beyond his daily duties. Marcus began spending his free time in London's public libraries, reading books about rhetoric, logic, and argumentation. He studied famous speeches and analyzed the techniques great debaters used to persuade their audiences. He practiced speaking in front of his mirror, working on his delivery and timing. His fellow guards noticed changes in Marcus but couldn't understand them. He seemed more focused, more intense than before. During breaks, while others relaxed and joked, Marcus often sat quietly, seemingly lost in thought. Some began calling him Professor as a joke, not realizing how close they were to the truth. The seed of a plan was forming in Marcus's mind. He didn't yet know exactly how he would achieve his goal, but he was determined to find a way onto Oxford's debate stage. He would prove that intelligence and eloquence could emerge from anywhere, even from behind the silent facade of a royal guard. The tourists continued taking photos and making jokes, completely unaware that the motionless soldier before them was quietly preparing to challenge everything they assumed about class, education, and intellectual capability. Marcus's real journey was just beginning, and it would take him far beyond the gates of Buckingham Palace. The Royal Guard's story. Part 2. Marcus's determination grew stronger with each passing week. The conversation with the Oxford professors had planted a seed that refused to stop growing. He spent every free moment researching the university, its history, and most importantly, the Oxford Union Society. What he discovered both inspired and intimidated him. The Oxford Union was more than just a debate club. It was an institution that had shaped British politics and culture for nearly 2 centuries. Past presidents included future prime ministers like William Gladstone, Harold Macmillan, and Benazir Bhutto. The chamber had hosted debates with world leaders, Nobel laureates, and the most influential thinkers of each generation. The more Marcus learned, the more impossible his dream seemed. These weren't just university students debating for fun. They were the intellectual elite, groomed from childhood in expensive private schools, trained in classical rhetoric and logic. Many came from families where political discussion was as common as breakfast conversation, but Marcus refused to be discouraged. He began developing a systematic approach to his preparation. During his shifts at the palace, he continued his silent observation and listening. But now he focused specifically on identifying argument patterns, logical structures, and persuasive techniques used by the important visitors he encountered. He started keeping a mental journal of interesting conversations and debates he witnessed. A heated discussion between 2 ambassadors about trade policy became a case study in economic argumentation. An argument between celebrity activists about environmental policy helped him understand how to balance passion with facts. Every interaction became educational material. After work, Marcus transformed his small apartment into a private debate preparation center. He covered one wall with newspaper clippings about current events, political developments, and social issues. Another wall displayed quotes from famous speakers and notes about rhetorical techniques. His bookshelf grew heavy with volumes on history, politics, philosophy, and public speaking. The challenge was finding opportunities to practice actual speaking. Reading about debate techniques was useful, but Marcus knew he needed real experience articulating arguments aloud. He started attending public events around London where discussion and debate occurred naturally. Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park became his regular Sunday destination. This famous spot had been a venue for public speaking since the 1870s, where anyone could stand on a soapbox and address crowds about any topic. Marcus initially went just to observe, studying how different speakers engaged their audiences and handled interruptions or challenges. The speakers at Hyde Park came from every background imaginable. Some were political activists, others were religious preachers, and many were ordinary citizens with strong opinions about current events. Marcus watched their techniques, noting which approaches worked and which failed to connect with listeners. After several weeks of observation, Marcus finally gathered the courage to speak himself. His topic was the importance of education access for working-class youth. Standing on the small platform facing a crowd of strangers, his heart pounded harder than it ever had during military training. His first attempt was awkward and nervous. His voice shook and he stumbled over several points. But he didn't give up. Marcus returned every Sunday, gradually becoming more comfortable with public speaking. He learned to project his voice, make eye contact with audience members, and handle hostile questions with grace. The experience taught him valuable lessons about connecting with diverse audiences. Unlike university debate halls filled with educated peers, Hyde Park crowds included people from every social and economic background. Marcus had to learn to explain complex ideas in simple terms that everyone could understand. His confidence grew with each speaking opportunity. Other regular speakers began recognizing him and offering constructive feedback. An elderly gentleman named Robert, a retired teacher who had been speaking at Hyde Park for 30 years, became an informal mentor. "You have natural talent," Robert told Marcus after a particularly effective speech about social mobility. "Your arguments are logical and you speak with genuine passion, but you need formal training to reach your full potential." Robert's words confirmed what Marcus already suspected. Self-teaching could only take him so far. If he truly wanted to compete at Oxford's level, he needed structured education and proper coaching. But how could a working-class Royal Guard access that kind of training? The answer came from an unexpected source. During one of his shifts, Marcus overheard a conversation between two Oxford alumni visiting the palace. They were discussing their concern about the university's lack of diversity and their desire to create outreach programs for underrepresented communities. Dr. Sarah Chen, a successful lawyer, was arguing for a scholarship program that would identify talented individuals from non-traditional backgrounds and provide them with educational opportunities. Her companion, businessman David Thompson, was skeptical about finding qualified candidates outside traditional academic channels. "The talent is there," Dr. Chen insisted. "We just need to look beyond our usual networks and give people chances they wouldn't otherwise have." Listening to their conversation, Marcus realized he was exactly the type of person Dr. Chen wanted to help. But approaching them while on duty was impossible. He needed to find another way to connect with advocates for educational opportunity. Marcus began researching organizations that promoted social mobility and educational access. He discovered several charities and foundations dedicated to helping working-class individuals pursue higher education. Many offered scholarships, mentoring programs, and training opportunities for people who showed academic potential but lacked traditional qualifications. One organization, the Sutton Trust, particularly caught his attention. They specialized in identifying and supporting bright students from disadvantaged backgrounds. Their programs included summer schools at prestigious universities, debate training workshops, and preparation courses for competitive university admissions. Marcus carefully crafted an application letter explaining his background, his self-directed education efforts, and his goal of participating in formal academic debates. He described his observations at Buckingham Palace and his speaking practice at Hyde Park. Most importantly, he articulated his belief that intellectual talent existed across all social classes and his desire to prove that point through achievement. The application process was competitive and demanding. Marcus had to write essays on complex topics, provide references from his military supervisors, and participate in interviews with education professionals. The experience was unlike anything he had encountered in his military career. While waiting for responses to his applications, Marcus continued his preparation routine. His speaking at Hyde Park improved dramatically, and he began tackling more sophisticated topics. He joined online discussion forums where university students debated current events, testing his arguments against educated opponents. His fellow Royal Guards began noticing significant changes in Marcus. His vocabulary had expanded, his confidence had increased, and he seemed to possess knowledge about a remarkable range of subjects. During meal breaks, conversations that had once centered on sports and entertainment gradually shifted toward politics, philosophy, and current events as Marcus naturally elevated the level of discussion. Some colleagues were impressed by his transformation, while others felt uncomfortable with his apparent ambition to rise above their shared circumstances. A few made jokes about Marcus getting above himself or forgetting where he came from, but Marcus remained focused on his goal, understanding that not everyone would support his unconventional journey. The letter he had been waiting for finally arrived on a rainy Tuesday evening. The Sutton Trust had accepted him into their debate training program. The scholarship would provide professional coaching, practice opportunities with university students, and preparation for competitive academic environments. Marcus read the letter 3 times before the reality sank in. His impossible dream suddenly seemed possible. The working-class kid from Birmingham, the Royal Guard who stood silently while tourists mocked him, was about to enter the world of elite academic debate. The real test of his abilities was about to begin. The Royal Guard Story. Part 3. The debate training program transformed Marcus's life in ways he never expected. Every Saturday he traveled from his military barracks to an elegant building in central London where the Sutton Trust conducted their workshops. The contrast between his 2 worlds was stark and sometimes overwhelming. During the week, Marcus stood guard in his red uniform, maintaining perfect stillness while tourists photographed him like a landmark. On weekends, he sat in comfortable seminar rooms with other scholarship recipients, engaging in intense intellectual discussions about politics, ethics, and social policy. His instructor, Dr. Patricia Williams, was a former Oxford debate champion who had gone on to become a successful barrister. She immediately recognized Marcus's potential, but also understood the challenges he faced. His knowledge was extensive but scattered. His passion was genuine but sometimes unfocused. Most importantly, he lacked the cultural confidence that came naturally to students from privileged backgrounds. The first few sessions were difficult for Marcus. The other scholarship recipients were impressive, but most had attended good state schools or even private schools on partial scholarships. They spoke with accents that suggested education and sophistication. Their references to literature, history, and current events flowed naturally from years of academic discussion. Marcus felt like an imposter. His Birmingham accent seemed harsh compared to their polished speech. His knowledge, while broad, came from personal reading rather than classroom instruction. When other participants casually mentioned books or concepts they had studied in school, Marcus often had to hide his unfamiliarity. Dr. Williams noticed his discomfort during the 3rd session. After the workshop ended, she asked Marcus to stay behind for a private conversation. He expected criticism or perhaps advice to find a program better suited to his background. Instead, Dr. Williams surprised him. "Marcus, you have something most of these other students lack," she said. "Your arguments come from real-world observation rather than academic theory. You understand how ordinary people think and feel because you've lived among them. That's a tremendous advantage if you learn to use it properly." Her words gave Marcus new confidence in his unique perspective. He stopped trying to sound like the other students and began embracing his authentic voice. When discussing economic policy, he drew on his father's factory experiences. When debating social mobility, he spoke from personal knowledge of working-class challenges. The change in Marcus's approach was dramatic. His arguments became more powerful because they combined intellectual rigor with genuine human experience. Other participants began seeking his opinions during small group discussions. Dr. Williams used his contributions as examples of effective persuasion that connected logic with emotion. As Marcus's confidence grew, so did his ambitions. The training program was excellent, but he wanted more. He began researching ways to attend actual university debate events as an observer. Most universities welcomed visitors to their debate societies, and Marcus started spending his evenings off-duty traveling to different institutions around London. His first visit to a university debate was both thrilling and intimidating. The Cambridge Union was hosting a discussion about artificial intelligence and job displacement. Marcus sat in the gallery, watching students who seemed impossibly sophisticated argue complex points with casual brilliance. The debaters quoted philosophers, referenced economic theories, and constructed arguments with precision that amazed Marcus. But he also noticed something interesting. Many of their points, while eloquently expressed, seemed disconnected from practical reality. They discussed unemployment theory without understanding what losing a job actually meant to working families. Marcus realized that his unique background gave him insights these privileged students lacked. His observations at Buckingham Palace had taught him about human psychology and motivation. His working-class upbringing had shown him how economic policies affected real people. His military service had given him discipline and courage that many academics never developed. Encouraged by these realizations, Marcus began participating more actively in online debate forums and political discussion groups. He started a blog where he analyzed current events from his distinctive perspective as a working-class intellectual. His writing attracted attention from people who appreciated his ability to explain complex ideas in accessible language. The blog's success led to unexpected opportunities. Marcus received invitations to speak at adult education centers and community colleges. These speaking engagements helped him refine his public presentation skills while building a reputation as an articulate advocate for social mobility and educational opportunity. His growing confidence showed in his daily work as a royal guard. While maintaining the required silence and stillness, Marcus now listened to conversations with greater analytical depth. He mentally practiced arguments and rebuttals based on discussions he overheard. His colleagues noticed a change in his bearing. He seemed more alert and engaged even while performing the most routine duties. The breakthrough moment came during a visit by a delegation of international education ministers. Marcus was stationed near the entrance where the visitors gathered before their meeting with senior palace officials. The ministers were discussing global trends in higher education access and social mobility. Dr. Elena Vasquez from Spain was arguing that traditional universities needed to find new ways to identify and nurture talent from underrepresented communities. Her colleague from Germany disagreed, claiming that academic excellence required years of structured preparation that couldn't be abbreviated or bypassed. Real intellectual ability, the German minister insisted, requires proper cultivation from an early age. You can't simply discover hidden genius in adulthood and expect it to compete with properly educated minds. Dr. Vasquez shook her head. I believe extraordinary potential exists everywhere, waiting for opportunity. Sometimes the most remarkable achievements come from people who take unconventional paths to excellence. Their debate continued for nearly 20 minutes, covering topics Marcus had studied extensively. He found himself mentally crafting responses to their arguments, identifying weaknesses in their logic, and developing alternative perspectives on their core questions. As the ministers finished their discussion and moved toward their meeting, Marcus made a decision that would change his life. Instead of maintaining his silent guard position, he took a small but significant action. He subtly shifted his stance and made brief eye contact with Dr. Vasquez as she passed. She noticed his movement and paused for a moment, studying his face with curiosity. Marcus maintained proper military bearing, but his eyes conveyed intelligence and engagement that surprised her. For just a few seconds, they shared a moment of human connection that transcended his ceremonial role. That evening, Marcus wrote the most important blog post of his life. He titled it, The Invisible Intellectuals, Talent Hidden in Plain Sight, and described his experiences as an educated working-class person in a role where intelligence was not expected or valued. The post went viral on social media, shared by thousands of people who recognized themselves in Marcus's story. Comments poured in from security guards, service workers, military personnel, and others whose intellectual abilities were overlooked because of their jobs or backgrounds. More importantly, the post was noticed by influential people in academia and media. Several journalists requested interviews with Marcus, and education advocates cited his writing in their own work, promoting social mobility. The attention was flattering, but also nerve-wracking for Marcus. His secret intellectual life was no longer secret. Colleagues at his regiment began asking questions about his online activities. Some were supportive, but others seemed resentful of his growing prominence. Marcus realized he was approaching a crossroads. His success in the training program, and his growing reputation as a writer and speaker, were opening doors to opportunities he had never imagined. But pursuing those opportunities might require leaving his military career and stepping fully into the academic world he had been observing from the outside. The decision became urgent when he received an email that made his heart race with excitement and terror. The Oxford Union Society had seen his blog post and was inviting him to participate in a debate as a guest speaker. The topic would be social, class and educational achievement in modern Britain. Marcus stared at the invitation for several minutes before the reality sank in. His impossible dream was becoming possible. The working-class Royal Guard was being invited to stand on the same stage where prime ministers and Nobel laureates had presented their arguments. But accepting the invitation would mean revealing his identity publicly and potentially ending his military career. The choice between security and opportunity had arrived sooner than he expected, and Marcus had to decide whether he was ready to risk everything for a chance to prove his point about hidden intellectual talent. The Royal Guard story. Part 4. Marcus stared at the Oxford Union invitation until his hands trembled. The email was formal and prestigious, bearing the Society's ancient crest and signed by the current president, Charlotte Pemberton. The debate was scheduled for 3 weeks away, giving him barely enough time to prepare for the most important moment of his life. The topic, social class and educational achievement in modern Britain, seemed almost designed for him. Marcus would be arguing alongside Dr. Sarah Chen, the same lawyer he had overheard at Buckingham Palace months earlier. Their opponents would be Professor Edmund Blackwood from Cambridge and Victoria Sterling, a conservative politician known for her views on meritocracy. But accepting the invitation meant more than just showing up to debate. Marcus would need to request leave from his military duties, and he couldn't hide his identity from his commanding officers. The story would inevitably become public, potentially ending his career as a Royal Guard and forcing him into an uncertain future. Marcus spent 3 sleepless nights weighing his options. He could decline the invitation, continue his quiet intellectual development and maintain his secure military position, or he could take the enormous risk of stepping into the spotlight and proving his point about hidden talent in the most visible way possible. The decision came when he remembered Professor Harrington's dismissive words about finding intellectual gems in unexpected places. Marcus realized that backing down now would prove her point and betray all the scholarship recipients and working-class intellectuals who faced similar barriers. On Thursday morning, Marcus requested a meeting with Colonel Harrison, his commanding officer. The colonel was a fair man who had noticed Marcus's exceptional performance and steady character over his 3 years of service. But he was also a traditionalist who valued military discipline and reputation. Marcus entered the colonel's office in full-dress uniform, maintaining perfect military bearing while his heart pounded. Colonel Harrison looked up from his paperwork with mild curiosity, assuming this was a routine request for leave or a minor administrative matter. "Sir, I need to inform you of an unusual situation that may affect my service," Marcus began formally. He explained his intellectual pursuits, his blog writing, and finally the invitation from Oxford Union. Throughout his explanation, he watched the colonel's expression change from surprise to confusion to something approaching respect. Colonel Harrison was quiet for several minutes after Marcus finished speaking. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and smiled slightly. "Guardsman Williams, in 30 years of military service, I've never received a briefing quite like that one." Marcus waited nervously for the colonel's decision. His future hung in the balance of this conversation. "You realize this could create significant media attention," Colonel Harrison continued. "The press loves stories about working-class heroes challenging the establishment. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, sir. I understand the risks, but I believe this is important. Too many talented people never get opportunities to show their abilities because of assumptions about class and education." The colonel studied Marcus carefully. "Your service record is exemplary, and you've shown exceptional dedication to personal development. I'm going to approve your leave request, but I want you to understand something clearly." Marcus stood at attention, waiting for whatever condition the colonel would impose. "If you do this, you'll become a symbol whether you want to or not. People will either celebrate you as proof that talent exists everywhere, or they'll criticize you for abandoning your proper place. Either way, your quiet life is over. Are you ready for that responsibility? The weight of the colonel's words settled on Marcus's shoulders. He had been thinking about personal achievement, but the colonel was right about the broader implications. His success or failure would be seen as evidence for or against social mobility and educational opportunity. I understand, sir. I think the message is worth the risk. Colonel Harrison extended his hand. Then you have my support, Guardsman Williams. Make us proud. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of intense preparation. Dr. Williams from the Sutton Trust program agreed to provide additional coaching, and Marcus took emergency leave to focus entirely on preparing for the debate. He read extensively about educational policy, social mobility statistics, and the history of class relations in Britain. More importantly, he refined his personal story and prepared to share experiences that most Oxford students had never encountered. Marcus practiced describing his father's struggles in the factory, his mother's night shift cleaning work, and his own journey from Birmingham's working-class neighborhoods to Buckingham Palace, and now to Oxford's debate chamber. The preparation was intense, but also liberating. For years, Marcus had hidden his intellectual abilities and educational aspirations from his military colleagues. Now he was preparing to display them publicly in the most prestigious academic venue in Britain. News of the upcoming debate began circulating in academic and political circles. Education journalists picked up the story, fascinated by the unusual background of one of the debaters. Marcus received interview requests from several publications, but he declined, wanting to focus entirely on his preparation. The media attention worried Marcus's parents. His father called from Birmingham, concerned that his son was getting in over his head with people who would never accept him as an equal. His mother was more supportive but anxious about the potential consequences of such public exposure. Marcus understood their concerns. He was entering a world where his accent, background, and appearance would immediately mark him as an outsider. The Oxford Union Chamber had witnessed centuries of debate by Britain's most privileged citizens. Royal Guards were expected to serve silently, not to challenge academic elites in their own domain. But Marcus also knew this opportunity might never come again. If he could succeed at Oxford, he would prove that intelligence and eloquence existed across all social classes. More importantly, he might inspire other working-class people to pursue their own intellectual ambitions despite societal barriers. The week before the debate, Marcus visited Oxford for the first time. Walking through the ancient college courtyards and Gothic archways, he felt both inspired and intimidated. Students moved confidently through spaces that seemed designed to reinforce their sense of belonging to an intellectual elite. Marcus toured the Oxford Union building, familiarizing himself with the chamber where he would soon speak. The room was smaller than he expected, but incredibly grand, with leather benches, ornate woodwork, and portraits of distinguished former presidents. Standing at the podium where Churchill, Einstein, and countless world leaders had spoken, Marcus felt the weight of history and opportunity. On the evening before the debate, Marcus sat alone in his hotel room, reviewing his notes one final time. He had prepared extensively, but he knew that success would depend on more than just preparation. He would need to connect with an audience that might be skeptical of his right to be there. Marcus thought about all the people who had helped him reach this point. Dr. Williams with her patient coaching, Colonel Harrison with his unexpected support, his parents with their sacrifices, and even the anonymous tourists who had unknowingly motivated him with their dismissive comments at Buckingham Palace. He also thought about the broader significance of tomorrow's debate. Win or lose, Marcus would be making a statement about talent, opportunity, and the potential that existed in unexpected places. He was no longer just pursuing a personal dream. He was carrying the hopes of everyone who had ever been underestimated because of their background. As Marcus finally tried to sleep, his mind raced with anticipation and nervousness. Tomorrow he would step onto Oxford's debate stage and attempt to prove that a working-class Royal Guard could compete intellectually with Britain's most privileged students and professors, the boy from Birmingham who had spent years standing silently while people made assumptions about his intelligence was about to speak with a voice that would be heard across the country. Marcus closed his eyes, knowing that tomorrow would change his life forever, regardless of the debate's outcome. The Royal Guard Story, Part 5. The morning of the debate arrived with typical Oxford drizzle. Marcus woke early in his small hotel room, his stomach churning with nervous energy. He had barely slept, his mind cycling through arguments and counter-arguments until dawn broke through the narrow window. As he dressed carefully in his best suit, purchased specifically for this occasion, Marcus caught sight of himself in the mirror. The transformation was remarkable. The same person who wore a red uniform and bearskin hat now looked like he belonged in academic circles. But appearances, he knew, would only carry him so far. The Oxford Union building bustled with activity when Marcus arrived 2 hours before the scheduled debate. Students and visitors streamed through the entrance, many clutching notebooks and phones, eager to witness what media outlets were calling the most unusual debate of the year. Marcus met Dr. Sarah Chen in the speaker's preparation room. She greeted him warmly, but he could see curiosity in her eyes. Despite her advocacy for social mobility, she was clearly surprised to be partnering with someone from his background. "I've read your blog posts," she said as they reviewed their strategy. "Your perspective on educational barriers is exactly what this debate needs. Don't let the formal atmosphere intimidate you. Speak from your experience." Their opponents arrived shortly afterward. Professor Edmund Blackwood from Cambridge carried himself with the casual authority of someone accustomed to intellectual dominance. Victoria Sterling, the conservative politician, projected confidence that suggested she viewed this debate as an easy victory over idealistic do-gooders. Professor Blackwood barely acknowledged Marcus during introductions, focusing his attention on Dr. Chen as the only serious opposition. Victoria Sterling was more direct in her dismissiveness, commenting to her partner loudly enough for Marcus to hear, "I suppose they needed someone to provide the working-class perspective." How authentic. Marcus felt his temper flare but controlled his response. Their condescension was exactly the attitude he hoped to challenge. Let them underestimate him. It would make his arguments more powerful when delivered. The chamber filled rapidly as debate time approached. Marcus was amazed by the diverse audience. Along with the expected Oxford students and faculty, he spotted journalists, education advocates, and even some familiar faces from his Sutton Trust program. Word had spread beyond academic circles, drawing people interested in the broader questions of class and opportunity. Charlotte Pemberton, the Oxford Union president, introduced the speakers with formal elegance. When she announced Marcus as Guardsman Marcus Williams, currently serving in Her Majesty's Royal Guards, a murmur rippled through the audience. Many had read about him, but seeing him in person made the story more real and dramatic. Professor Blackwood opened for the opposition, delivering a polished argument about meritocracy and academic standards. His position was that educational achievement required years of cultivation, and that lowering standards to accommodate different backgrounds ultimately hurt everyone. His presentation was smooth and confident, exactly what the audience expected from a Cambridge don. Dr. Chen responded effectively, presenting statistical evidence about talented students who never received opportunities due to social barriers. Her legal training showed in her systematic approach and careful citation of research studies. She built a strong foundation for the argument that society wasted enormous potential by limiting access to education. Victoria Sterling's contribution focused on personal responsibility and the dangers of creating excuse cultures that blame society rather than individual effort. Her political experience was evident in her ability to connect with audience emotions while presenting controversial views in reasonable terms. Then it was Marcus's turn. He walked to the podium slowly, feeling hundreds of eyes examining him. The chamber was quieter than it had been for previous speakers, as if the audience was genuinely curious about what this unusual participant might say. Marcus began quietly, his Birmingham accent clear but not exaggerated. "I stand before you tonight not as an academic expert, but as living proof that intellectual capability exists in places where it's often overlooked and undervalued." He described his childhood in Birmingham, but not as a sob story designed to generate sympathy. Instead, Marcus painted a picture of a working-class community rich with intelligence and curiosity that rarely had outlets for expression. He talked about his father's sophisticated understanding of industrial processes and his mother's insights into human psychology gained through years of service, work, The audience was captivated as Marcus described his journey from library-loving teenager to royal guard to debate participant. He explained how his position at Buckingham Palace had provided a unique education in human nature and international affairs, turning apparent disadvantage into intellectual opportunity. But Marcus's most powerful moments came when he directly challenged his opponent's assumptions. He addressed Professor Blackwood's arguments about academic standards with devastating precision. The professor suggests that intellectual excellence requires proper cultivation from childhood, Marcus said, making direct eye contact across the chamber. But this view assumes that cultivation only happens in certain environments. I would argue that 3 years of analyzing human behavior at one of the world's most important political centers has provided me with insights that many traditional students never gain. He turned to Victoria Sterling's points about personal responsibility. The minister is absolutely correct that individual effort matters enormously, but she overlooks how much effort is required for someone like me to reach this podium. Every working-class person who achieves academic success has demonstrated extraordinary personal responsibility, overcoming barriers that privileged students never face. Marcus's arguments were powerful because they combined logical rigor with authentic experience. He quoted educational theorists and policy experts, but he also shared personal observations about how class assumptions affected daily interactions. His voice grew stronger and more confident as he found his rhythm. The turning point came when Professor Blackwood attempted to interrupt with a condescending question about Marcus's formal qualifications to discuss educational policy. Marcus's response was swift and devastating. Professor, your question perfectly illustrates the problem we're debating tonight. You assume that wisdom about education can only come from people with proper credentials and institutional positions. But I've observed educational processes from a perspective you've never experienced, as someone fighting to access opportunities you've always taken for granted. The audience erupted in applause, recognizing both the intellectual strength of Marcus's response and his courage in directly confronting academic prejudice. Professor Blackwood looked genuinely surprised, perhaps realizing for the first time that he was facing a formidable opponent rather than a symbolic participant. Marcus continued his argument, discussing how society's loss of working-class intellectual talent represented both moral failure and economic waste. He presented specific policy recommendations for expanding educational access while maintaining academic rigor. His proposals were detailed and practical, based on extensive research and personal understanding of the barriers involved. As Marcus concluded his initial presentation, he felt a sense of completion that went beyond the debate itself. For years, he had been developing arguments in silence and privacy. Now, in Oxford's most prestigious venue, he was finally able to express ideas that had been building inside him. The audience's response was immediate and intense. Applause continued for nearly a minute, with many people rising to their feet. Marcus noticed tears in some faces and excitement in others. He had not only presented effective arguments, he had given voice to experiences and perspectives that rarely reached such prominent platforms. The debate continued with rebuttals and responses, but the momentum had shifted dramatically. Professor Blackwood and Victoria Sterling found themselves defending positions that suddenly seemed outdated and elitist. Dr. Chen built effectively on Marcus's foundation, presenting additional evidence for systemic change. But the evening clearly belonged to Marcus. His combination of intellectual rigor and personal authenticity had created something unprecedented in the Oxford Union's long history. He had proven that working-class intelligence could not only compete with privileged education, but could offer insights that traditional academic backgrounds couldn't provide. As the formal debate concluded and the audience began filing out, Marcus realized that his life had changed permanently. Tomorrow's newspapers would carry the story across Britain. Educational advocates would cite his performance as evidence for policy changes. Most importantly, other working-class people with intellectual ambitions would see that academic barriers could be overcome. The impossible dream had become reality. The Royal Guard had commanded Oxford's debate stage, and everything would be different now. The Royal Guard's Story, Part 6. The morning after the debate, Marcus woke to find his phone buzzing with dozens of messages and missed calls. News of his performance had spread rapidly through social media and traditional outlets, Headlines across British newspapers proclaimed variations of Royal Guard conquers Oxford and working-class hero takes on academic elite. Marcus scrolled through Twitter to find hundreds of videos from the debate being shared and discussed. His direct challenge to Professor Blackwood had been clipped and viewed thousands of times. Comments poured in from people who recognized their own struggles in his story, thanking him for giving voice to experiences they had never seen represented in academic spaces. But the attention was overwhelming and sometimes uncomfortable. Some commentators praised him as proof that talent existed everywhere, while others dismissed his success as a publicity stunt or token gesture. Conservative critics argued that one exceptional individual didn't prove anything about systemic barriers, while progressive advocates claimed his story as validation of their policy positions. The media requests were constant and increasingly difficult to manage from his hotel room. Journalists wanted interviews, television producers offered documentary opportunities, and publishers expressed interest in book deals. Marcus realized he needed help navigating this unexpected celebrity, but he also understood that his platform came with responsibilities. His first priority was returning to his military duties and explaining the situation to his colleagues. The train ride back to London gave Marcus time to process what had happened and prepare for reactions from his fellow guards. Some would be supportive, but others might resent the attention he was receiving or question his loyalty to their shared military culture. Colonel Harrison greeted Marcus with a mixture of pride and concern. The debate coverage had reached military leadership, and there were questions about how to handle a serving soldier who had become a national symbol. Marcus assured the colonel that he remained committed to his duties, but they both recognized that his situation had become complicated. His fellow guards' reactions varied exactly as Marcus had expected. Some expressed genuine pride in his achievement and asked thoughtful questions about his educational journey. Others seemed uncomfortable with his sudden prominence, making jokes about Professor Williams that carried undertones of resentment. Sergeant Davies, a colleague Marcus respected, pulled him aside after their first shift together following the debate. "You've done something amazing," Davies said quietly. "But don't forget where you come from, or the people who've been with you along the way." The warning was gentle but clear. Marcus's success could easily distance him from the community that had shaped him if he wasn't careful about how he handled his new opportunities. He needed to remain grounded while pursuing the educational and speaking opportunities now being offered to him. The most meaningful response came from unexpected sources. Letters arrived from working-class students around Britain, sharing their own struggles with educational barriers and expressing gratitude for seeing someone like them succeed in academic circles. A teenager from Liverpool wrote about applying to university for the first time after watching Marcus's debate performance. A middle-aged factory worker described enrolling in evening classes to pursue interests he had suppressed for decades. Marcus realized that his debate performance had accomplished something more important than personal achievement. He had become proof that intellectual curiosity and capability existed across all social classes, inspiring others to pursue their own educational dreams despite obstacles. Several universities contacted Marcus with speaking invitations and even offers for honorary positions or special admissions programs. Oxford itself, through Dr. Chen's connections, suggested possibilities for continuing education programs that could accommodate his military service while providing formal academic training. The opportunity that most excited Marcus came from the Sutton Trust, his original training organization. They offered him a position as an advocate and spokesman for their social mobility programs, combining speaking engagements with policy work aimed at expanding educational access. The role would allow him to remain in military service part-time while building a career focused on the issues he cared about most. Marcus's parents visited London for the first time to attend a follow-up interview he gave for a national television program. Watching their son speak confidently about complex social issues on national television, they struggled to reconcile this articulate advocate with the boy who had left Birmingham to join the army. His father, initially skeptical about Marcus's academic pursuits, had become genuinely proud. "I always knew you were smart," he told Marcus privately. "But I never imagined you could hold your own with those university types. You've shown them that working people aren't just muscle and sweat." His mother was more emotional, tears in her eyes as she watched her son being treated as an expert on educational policy by television interviewers. "You've proven that our family produces thinkers as well as workers," she said. "That matters more than you know." The long-term impact of Marcus's Oxford debate became clear over the following months. The Sutton Trust reported significant increases in applications from working-class candidates who cited Marcus's story as inspiration. Several universities announced new outreach programs specifically designed to identify and support non-traditional students with demonstrated intellectual potential. More importantly, Marcus's success had shifted public conversation about class and education. His story became a reference point in policy discussions, cited by politicians and educators across the political spectrum as evidence that talent existed everywhere and deserved opportunity regardless of background. Marcus continued his dual life as Royal Guard and educational advocate, but the balance was becoming difficult to maintain. The speaking requests and policy work demanded increasing time and energy, while his military duties remained important to him personally and symbolically. The decision about his future came during a conversation with Dr. Chen 6 months after the debate. She had been appointed to lead a new government commission on social mobility and educational access, and she offered Marcus a permanent position as community liaison and policy researcher. "Your voice carries weight precisely because of your background," she explained. "Academic experts can cite statistics, but you can explain what barriers actually feel like from the inside. That perspective is invaluable for creating effective policy." Marcus realized that accepting the position would mean leaving his military career and fully committing to educational advocacy. It was both exciting and terrifying. The security and structure of military life had provided stability during his intellectual development, but continuing that career might limit his ability to help others facing similar challenges. After extensive discussions with Colonel Harrison, his family, and his mentors, Marcus made his decision. He would complete his current military commitment and then transition to full-time work in educational policy and advocacy. The move represented both personal opportunity and public service, allowing him to use his platform for maximum positive impact. His final day as a Royal Guard was emotional and symbolic. Standing outside Buckingham Palace for the last time in uniform, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since the day he overheard the Oxford professors dismissing the possibility of finding intellectual talent in unexpected places. Tourists still gathered to photograph the guards, making comments about the ceremony and tradition. But now Marcus was no longer the silent, underestimated figure he had been for 3 years. His story had become proof that intelligence and eloquence existed everywhere, waiting for opportunity and recognition. As Marcus changed out of his red uniform for the final time, he thought about all the people who had supported his journey and the many more who might benefit from the path he had helped establish. The working-class Royal Guard who had once stood silently while being mocked was now a national voice for educational opportunity and social mobility. The impossible had become possible, and Marcus Williams had proven that talent, determination, and opportunity could overcome even the most entrenched social barriers. His story would continue to inspire others to pursue their own dreams of intellectual achievement, regardless of where they started or what others expected from them.